Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about the shutter speed. I'm going to go over what the shutter speed is, actually the function of it in the camera, and that's why I have this oldie but goodie here. I'm also going to explain why I think it's more important than the f-stop, at least for novice photographers, because you're more likely to get a bad image if you have your shutter speed wrong than you are if you were to have your f-stop wrong. Now, if you want more information on the f-stop, you can see my video. I'm going to post a link here up on the screen, and I'll have a link down in the description as well. But just a brief overview, the f-stop is the aperture, the hole through which light passes through the lens, and it controls the brightness. Now, the shutter speed controls time. So when you take a picture, you're not actually taking a picture of an instant, like a immeasurably small instant. You're taking a slice of time. So a lot of my Milky Way photography, I'm actually shooting a 30-second shutter speed, which means the shutter is open, the camera is open and collecting light for 30 seconds. So I'm actually taking a slice of 30 seconds of time. And that's where you can see some star trails and star movement in the corners. And that's because everything that happens within that 30 seconds will be captured by the camera. And if anything's moving while that shutter is open, it's going to show as blurry. Now I have this old camera here, so I can actually show you what the shutter speed looks like in the camera. It's nice because you can pop open these old cameras and you can actually watch the mechanisms work. You can't really do that so well with the digital. So, so again, you think of the f-stop as being brightness. As the light comes through, you can change the diameter of the hole, so the larger the hole, the brighter the light is that's coming through, the smaller the hole, the dimmer the light. And then you're controlling the amount of time that the camera is actually open and collecting that light. So you're balancing the two. If you make the hole bigger, the aperture, the f-stop hole bigger, which is actually a smaller f-stop number, it's a little confusing, you need less time. If you make the hole smaller, you're going to need a greater amount of time. So you're always doing a trade-off. And here, let me show you what the f-stop is, so that, or the shutter speed is, so you have a better comprehension of what I'm going to be talking about in the rest of this video. Okay, here's the back of the camera. Again, like I said, the nice thing about these cameras is you can pop them open. So here, I just charged the camera, and now I'm going to fire a picture. This is going to be, so you can see this is the curtain, opens and closes for a brief second of time. That is actually the shutter speed. I can change how long this is open for. So that was a 15th of a second. Let's go to an 1/8 of a second. And now I'm going to go to a 1/4 of a second. Now I'm going to go to a 1/2 a second. Now I'm going to go to 1 full second. Now when it's open for 1 full second, you're actually able to see through the lens, and you can see that opening is actually the f-stop, just to give you a refresher. And I'm going to change the f-stop as the camera's open. So you can see that changing. Now if I go to bulb setting, I can leave this as long as I hold the shutter open, and now you can see the f-stop changing. That's 22, and that's 1.8. So that's just a refresher on the f-stop. So again, you're taking a picture of amount of time. And why is that important? Besides, how can that ruin your image? Let me explain that here now. Well, apparently Micah needs a little comforting. So why does that changing the time actually affect your image, and how can that ruin your image? Now, like I said earlier, everything that happens, all the movement that occurs while the camera's open is going to be captured by the camera. So when you're taking pictures, you're holding the camera up, and I don't know about you, but nobody's perfectly steady. So you're going to be breathing, your heart's beating, you're just twitching, just in general. All of this is movement. So this movement that happens can be captured by the camera. And so what you want is a shutter speed that opens and closes so quickly that even though your natural body movement, breathing, heartbeat, and just regular twitchiness is not captured. So the camera doesn't see that movement. If it does, it's called camera shake, and the whole image will be blurry. And that pretty much ruins the photo. No matter how good the composition is, no matter how good the exposure is, no matter how interesting the subject is, if the photo is all blurry, it's pretty much garbage. I mean, you just throw it away. It's unsalvageable. You can't Photoshop it sharper. I mean, you can to some degree, but generally it's not salvageable. Well, I'd pretty much just say, just guarantee it's not salvageable. And by choosing the wrong shutter speed or not paying attention to your shutter speed while you're taking pictures, that's what usually gets most novice photographers in trouble. Now, when you're looking through the viewfinder, which is this right here, you can see your shutter speed in the bottom, typically, or somewhere in there, or you can see it on your LCD screen on the back. Now, the general rule of thumb, when you're using a standard lens, so let's say your kit lens, 18 to 50 millimeter, 18 to 55 millimeters, you generally want your shutter speed to be at least 1.5 times or 2 times faster than the focal length of your lens. So, okay, if you're an 18 millimeter lens, you're at 18 millimeters taking pictures, you double that, that's 36. You want your shutter speed to be at least double 1/36th of a second. So 1/60th of a second. It's generally the rule of thumb, at least in the olden days when you had 50 millimeter lenses, well, this is an 85, but if you had a 50 millimeter lens, which is the pretty standard walk around, take pictures with lens, you wanted a shutter speed that was greater than 1/60th of a second. And I would say that's generally true now. Even with kit lenses, you want to keep your shutter speed, when you're hand holding the camera, at least at 1/60th of a second. Now, some people are a little more steadier, and maybe you can get away with 1/40th or 1/30th of a second. Especially if you're at 18 millimeters, you might really be able to get away with even 1/20th of a second. But that's pushing it. I mean, you have to be pretty still. That's why I generally say twice as much. And often I say twice as much is because with the digital cameras, most of them have small aperture or small sensor size, which I talk about in another video, and a magnification factor. The magnification factor effectively magnifies the focal length of the lens, so therefore you need a faster shutter speed than if you were shooting with a 35 millimeter film camera. So general rule of thumb, twice what your shutter speed, focal length of your lens is. So if you have a 100 millimeter lens, you're going to want to shoot at 1/200th of a second. If you have a 200 millimeter lens, you're going to want to shoot at 1/400th of a second. And again, that's if you're hand holding it. Now, if you have it on a tripod, it doesn't matter. You can shoot at 30-second intervals, 4 hours, it doesn't matter, because the tripod will hold the camera steady. You're not going to get that shake. Now, a few examples of where shutter speed can be used to help with telling the story inside a photo. So we're talking about time with shutter speed. So shutter speed can help to convey time. It can help to convey movement, because if something is blurry in the image, it means it's moving. And so you can tell that story. Now, if there's a couple different ways you can do that. Sometimes if you have things that are moving and they're blurry and your subject is solid, that helps to differentiate your subject and help them really stand out, so you know that they're being still. And helps focus the crowd, because the viewer's eyes are not going to look at what's blurry necessarily. They'll see the shapes and such, but they'll concentrate on what's sharply in focus. The other thing you can do is you can do a technique called panning. And panning is a really nice technique, especially if there's something that's if somebody's running, cars, and you want to convey motion without making the subject blurry. What you do, and it's a fairly simple technique, is as the subject goes by, you track them and you take the picture as they go. And this is the result here. Now you can see the background is blurry, the subject is so sharply in focus. So you know the subject, in this case a car, is moving, which is great. So you get, so again, this is the panning technique. Now, you're going to need to choose your shutter speed appropriately in order for this to be effective, depending on what lens length you're using. But you can safely say if the telephoto lens, let's say a 200 millimeter lens, if your subject is decently far away, 1/100th of a second will work. The key is you might have to test it a few times So hopefully you have some opportunities. Like if you're at a track and there's cars going around, you try it a few times, you figure out what shutter speed combination is working. And again, so that the technique is you track the subject, you take the picture, and when you take the picture, you don't stop. You keep tracking with the subject even after you've taken the picture. And that just helps to make sure that you don't have any sudden like stops. It works well when you start tracking, you take the picture and you ease off. The next one comes by. Again, you should be looking through the viewfinder, but this is just for display purposes, just to give you an idea. With like a 50mm lens, 18mm lens, the subject's a little closer, maybe a 60th of a second or 30th of a second. Again, it's something you're gonna have to play with and you'll find out the right combination. Definitely a fun technique to use. Yeah, if you have kids, it works well with them too. Get down, get low on the ground, track them and take pictures. And then you get a nice sense of them moving, running, and all that. It's a great technique they can use for a lot of different things. Now, conversely, your subject, since you want it to be sharp, if you use a really high shutter speed on something that's like a car movement, if the car just appears completely still on the track, it looks like it's just parked there. So you don't really get a sense of movement. So that's why the panning technique works really well. And you can't really just let the car be blurry, because then the car isn't your subject anymore, because people aren't going to want to focus on it. So here's a couple of examples where the car is just sitting still or is blurry. And you can tell both of those, though they're a decent, well, the car sitting still is a decent picture. The one with the car blurry, you just don't even want to look at the car. You're looking in the background to see what the subject of the photo might be. Now, there's a few other instances where you can freeze the subject and still convey motion. So for instance, if somebody's in midair, the audience, your viewers, aren't going to assume that the person is just floating there. They're going to know that the person is in the middle of something. So you can stop motion of a person in midair, or birds in flight, or various other things. You know, a cup falling, you know, it's frozen in midair. And people will understand that you're stopping the motion. And that's actually the technique name is stop motion. And then there's the other effect is called motion blur. And that's where you allow some blur in the image in order to convey motion as well. So the shutter speed is actually a very dynamic setting. And it's something that I think is overlooked fairly often, just because photographers, especially novice photographers, get into this whole f-stop thing. And the f-stop is important, like I said. And if you watch the other video, you can get some other information about why it's important. But really, in my mind, the shutter speed is something you should really pay attention to. And let me give you a couple examples of where you might get in trouble. So you're with some friends, you have your camera out, you're taking pictures, the sun's getting low and getting dark, and you're not paying attention to the shutter speed. Your camera's set on automatic, and you're taking pictures. You're looking at the viewfinder, and the pictures look fine, but then when you look at them on the computer, you can tell that they're all blurry. And you're like, geez, my photos, is that not focusing right, or what? More than likely, because the sun's getting darker, the light's getting dimmer, and your eyes are adjusting fairly well. Your f-stop can only do so much, and then at a certain point, like I said, you're trading off. So your f-stop, you're at the biggest aperture you can get. So the only way the camera can compensate for the loss of light is by increasing your shutter speed time. So you start taking slower and slower shutters, and then you may not notice until all of a sudden you hear click, click, and you're like, wait a minute, my shutter speed was really, really slow. Because your shutter speed, the camera will automatically start reducing it to, maybe you start off at 125th of a second, to a 60th of a second, to a 30th, to a 15th, to a 8th of a second, and such, and down. And all of a sudden your photos are just getting all blurry. So if you know it's getting dark out, or you're just in low light conditions in general, you really should pay attention to what your shutter speed is doing. The other thing is, when you're using a telephoto lens, you really want to make sure that you have a high enough shutter speed. So again, the rule of thumb, you have the shutter speed twice the focal length of the lens. 200mm lens, you want to shoot at 1/400th of a second, or 1/500th of a second or more. Now I want to go over the scale real quick of the shutter speed, just so you're familiar with it. So like everything else in photography, the scales always double in half as you travel one way and the other. So for shutter speed, you start at B, which stands for bulb. And bulb, basically, I showed you earlier, is you press down the shutter button and the shutter stays open until you release it. So this is for specialty photography, a lot of time astrophotography, night photography, various other like landscape photography as well. Then typically it goes for digital cameras, you start at 30 seconds and 20 seconds, 15, work your way down to 1 second, and then you start working up half a second, quarter, an eighth, a 16th, and then it goes to a 30th instead of a 1/32nd, 60th, 125, 250, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 16,000. Now there's not too many cameras that go above 2,000, very few go above 4,000, hardly any really go above 8,000th of a second, and maybe one camera goes to 1/16,000th of a second. Now, to give you a few examples of where you might use the shutter speed in landscape photography, when you have water, for instance, you typically want a longer shutter speed. So here's, for instance, is a shot of a waterfall, and I think this is a 1 minute exposure, approximately. I'll verify it and I'll put it up on the screen so you can see the camera settings. I also used a neutral density filter to help extend the shutter speed. So neutral density filter, I talk a little bit about a graduated neutral density filter, but basically it's like sunglasses for the camera. It darkens, reduces the amount of light coming in so you can get a longer shutter speed, which you do a lot for water photography because it gets that silky look to it. So be very cognizant of the shutter speed. I would start playing with that if you get an opportunity. Try different shutter speeds. See what it's like to take a picture of, say, a car going by at various shutter speeds. So a 1/5 of a second, a 1/10, a 15th, a 30th, a 60th. Try the panning thing. Again, you can do it with kids, you can do it with cars, you know, on your street, just playing around. It'll definitely behoove you, especially if you want to do sports photography. You have kids that are in sports, or you like motorsports, or you like just going and taking pictures of sports in general. It's something that'll be really important. If you like birds, the shutter speed is also very important because you're going to be using a telephoto lens. So you're going to be needing to be cognizant of what your shutter speed is as you're shooting. All right. I think that pretty much covers the entire gamut of the shutter speed, at least a good general overview. If you have any questions or constructive criticism, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. I'll be posting more as often as I can. I'm trying to do this more and more often so that I keep you guys engaged and such. I have a Facebook page and a blog post. Links down below in the description. I have some other links that'll pop here shortly for other similar videos. So again, thank you. I hope it was informative. And if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'll try to get back to them as soon as I can. Sometimes it may delay a week or two. Sometimes I see them right away and answer right away. All right. Again, thanks. Bye.